So I wanted to bring Mr. Good on. He represents the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. He is a lawyer. He represents them, and he has views on this. He's in the forefront of this controversy in the United States. So, Ken, I want to say hello to you. Say hello to everybody. If there's anything I missed about an introduction, go ahead and fill us in.
Oh, first of all, thank you very much for having me. And I would just say, it's kind of interesting how something so small as going to Tennessee to be on a panel at a law school, you just don't realize how small the world is. When I was a teenager or when I just graduated from law school, I went all the way to Paris and I got on their subway and I turned around and the next thing you know, somebody was saying, "Hi, Ken." So you don't realize how small the world is until you're faced with it right in front of your face. I would add to an introduction is I'm a father of 2 daughters, and I'm married and have 2 girls. My wife is also an attorney, and they're the most important thing to me. And so to all the other fathers of daughters, go girls.
I've got 5. David, you have 3? I think if he's able to.
Granddaughter.
Yeah. So, Ken, I wanted to start out what we try to do on this program, and what we've started out, David and I try to do, is we want to educate folks that don't have time to deal with and delve into the minutia of everyday current events. They go about their lives every day, and people that are cursed like you, Ken, and me and David, with the appetite to understand and dissect these things. A lot of people, when they hear bail reform, it goes in one ear and out the other because there's so many other things that they have going on. I want to do a few things a little bit differently than maybe you have in the past. I want to start out because I love the Constitution. I'm sitting here looking at 2 busts of Thomas Jefferson and Madison. I've got a Statue of Liberty on my desk. I've got inkwells with feather pens in them. And I want people to understand a little bit more when they hear bail reform. Where did it come from? Where did this thing come from, bail? Did it just come from magic from our little town where we post our podcast from? Or is it something that's ingrained in law that helps us produce and procure freedom? So I just like to start out with saying, and Ken, this is going to be a little bit different, but we're going to get into some more of the meat potatoes of this. The 8th Amendment of the Constitution says the excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel or unusual punishments inflicted. Ken, give us a 1-minute background on what that means and why it's in the Constitution.
Well, okay, what I would say, when we came over on the Mayflower, when we came over from England all the way back, I know the Mayflower was from Italy, but when we came over from England, we brought with us English common law. And our system of bail really dates back to the common law. And common law is really custom and practice. It's not something that's written down. But what the English did for the first time, they limited the king's power to hold somebody without bail. And that was called the Emancipation Proclamation. And so we kind of took that document and we put that in our state constitutions. Like the Texas Constitution says, everyone has a right to bail with sufficient sureties unless they're charged with certain crimes. And so the concept, I think, that bail is everybody has a right to unless it's like capital murder or something really bad. That's the concept in the majority of the Constitution. What the
right. So going back to English law, what we were trying to do is what I like to call, since the 8th Amendment is part of the Bill of Rights, which the first 10 amendments of the Bill of Rights, what we tried to do there is, I like to call it the Bill of Anti-Rights. I like to call it the Bill of, says the government cannot do this to you. And the English law, they got tired of the king because he was holding people. He would hold them indefinitely, charge them with a crime. And if you read the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson actually mentions this, and it's found its way into the Constitution with Madison, is that we got tired, some folks in the past, of the king and his judges who he appointed. They would charge people, political adversaries, put them in prison or put them in jail on a charge, pretended or not, and hold them there indefinitely. And so with these papers back in English law, and I think it even goes back to the Magna Carta, we've adopted that in the United States, saying that we can't be arrested on the street for something and be held indefinitely. So we come up with this bail system. So with that said, explain the bail system a little bit more.
You're right. It is the Magna Carta. That's where the king cannot charge you with a crime and never have it go to trial and just hold you. But what the bail system does, one of the things that, makes me upset is when people say, well, that you can't be held because you haven't been found guilty. And, the whole concept of bail has nothing to do with innocence or guilt. The concept of bail is what assurance you're going to give to the court that you're going to return to answer the charges that have been filed against you or any charges that will be filed against you. And so our concept of bail doesn't have anything to do with whether you're innocent or guilty. It's what assurances that you're going to give that you'll return to answer the charges. You can see that in the Magna Carta. The king can't hold you, but you have to assure the king that you will return and answer the charges that have been filed. And so there was a point in time, bail's been around for 200 years in this country, over 200 years. And there was a time where if you bailed somebody out and they failed to appear, you took their place. And we've since changed that to a dollar amount. And so most bail in the United States is like an insurance policy. They set your bail at $1,000. You go to a private surety bondsman and you pay a premium, and they're guaranteeing, like an insurance policy, that you will go to court and answer your charges. If you don't, then we'll get you back within a certain period of time, or we'll pay the $1,000 to the court.
So someone's arrested, hypothetically speaking, and there's $1,000 bond, and they don't have $1,000. So they go to private surety. They get this private surety for 10%. It's basically 10, 15%.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So they pay 10% to a private person, and then the private person puts up that bond to the court for the $1,000. But that's saying that the person that was charged with the crime will show up for court. And if they don't show up for court, then the private bail bondsman is on the hook for the full amount. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. With that being said, what is excessive? If you have somebody, because this is getting into the argument against you, is that, you have somebody that gets arrested, and read into this. Everybody listening to me probably already knows this. So let's say you go into Walgreens and you fill up your bags full of crap and you walk out, and then say it is in the city that will arrest you for it. You get arrested for it. What if there was no bail? Imagine a world that liberals and the left want us to have of no cash bail. What does crime look like in the United States?
Well, we've been trying some of these alternatives to the private surety bail system for the last couple of years, especially during COVID. And so we've gotten a glimpse very quickly on steroids of what the left wants to do and what it would look like, because what it is a system of, hey, everybody just wants to come to court. They want to resolve their cases. So we don't really need bail. They will come anyway. So different states have tried different things, but they're all the same thing. It's simple release. It's either released without bail, released on zero bail, released on a personal bond, which is just a promise. You're not paying any money. And all of them, I just call them simple release. And the problem is there's no accountability. And when you have simple release, people don't want to come to court. And so the failure to appear rate skyrockets. As failures to appear skyrocket, does it defeat the purpose of bail? I mean, I think charitable bail funds do have their place, but they've always in the United States been very small organizations. It was only, like you pointed out, because of the George Floyd situation and the vice president, that they suddenly just had money over hand over fist. And we've seen some organizations get in trouble because they've started just mishandling that money. But I do think that because of this money that they've raised, they have discovered that there are no people that are first-time offenders stuck in jail. So they're ending up bonding out the really dangerous people, the people that nobody else will bond out. And so that's why you're starting to see restrictions placed on charitable bail funds. Like, I think Indiana just limited them to misdemeanors no larger than $2,000 because they have people they were bonding out. They don't have any training and they don't have any ability to supervise, and they were committing more crime. I was
talking to a friend of mine the other day on the other side of this argument, and I'd like to get your input on this. If someone's arrested, they go to jail, they're released on their own recognizance, they don't pay bail, they go out and they reoffend. This is worst case scenario. They reoffend, which it happens, and they go back on a new charge. They get out with no bail. While they're out again, they reoffend on a new charge. They get out again. Well, those three offenses are adding up on them. So when they're arrested, the judge will necessarily know that they didn't show up for the other three. When does he stop and say, you're going to jail, you're not going to get bail?
That's where the politics comes into play.
No doubt. This whole entire thing is about politics.
But we've got one extreme perspective taking the position that you can never hold somebody, no matter how many times they fail to appear, no matter how many times they screw up. You can't hold them, because if they say they can't afford it, well, then they can't afford it and you can't hold them. That's not what any of the cases say, and they're just ignoring the law. Because if you have a criminal history, or if you violate a court order ordering you to come to court, the court can always hold you for the violation of a court order. And if you've got a criminal history, the court, if you've got a substantial one, if you've got committed bad crimes, they can hold you. But if you just don't come to court and you've got 15 failures to appear, the court can decide, hey, you're not going to come to court, so we need to hold you until your case is ready to be resolved.
However, and since you mentioned it, the political reality is, in some of these cities with the DAs, the judges, when these folks reoffend twice under the first, they released with no bail in the first charge, released for no bail in the second charge, released with no bail in the third charge, the judges, as you just said, could hold them under contempt of the other ones. But they're not doing it, and it's a political lever that these people are pulling, and there's no need to beat around the bush. It's a racial political move. It's a maneuver politically used by Black Lives Matter and their ilk and Kamala Harris, and they're saying this. So the judges, even though they could, that's the thing. I would not even be afraid to entertain the idea of the first misdemeanor you get, no bail. But then the second one you get, I'm in your life, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people that have been arrested 40, 50 times.
But the problem we have is much worse than that, because they're getting arrested over and over and over.
And the judges aren't saying you've had 3 chances, now you're done.
Yeah, but when they fail to appear, their case gets put on hold until they come back, because that's what's required under the Constitution. And the courts have all this pressure to keep their dockets at a manageable number, because they keep having the same number of cases. So it's not just doing nothing, it's dismissing the case because they didn't come back. And so instead of waiting on them, it's a misdemeanor, so we're just going to dismiss it and we're going to go on to the next one. So
they can't dismiss that under the Eighth Amendment is saying it's not a speedy trial because they didn't show up. Well, how are they dismissing them?
They're just dismissing them to manage their dockets, because their backlogs are getting so big. And they're saying, well, we have discretion. The DA says we have discretion and we're not going to prosecute this case. Or, they'll just say, in the name of justice, we just dismiss it. And the DA makes a motion and the judge approves it. And so
they're back on the streets. Nobody cares. Walgreens shut down, Targets leaves town. You got San Francisco the way it looks right now because of that. Because there are certain issues that we have to deal with. Because if they can't be dealt with speedily in the courts, and they have a way around it, they can dismiss it, and it makes the political donors happy. But they're destroying their cities at the same time.
Absolutely, everything you just said, absolutely. And when California misdemeanor courts have an 80% failure to appear rate, that tells you why we have increased crime in California.
Let me ask you this. This is a favor to me and the audience. I have a question, a sincere question. In the Sixth Amendment, and somebody brought this up to me because I was talking to a good friend of mine about this the other day. Do have right to counsel, okay, under the Sixth Amendment. Can you tell me why, and if I'm incorrect, let me know. If you have a bail hearing, say you get arrested one night, and the next day you have a bail hearing through TV, and the judge is looking at you and you're looking at the judge, there's no attorney present, and do you have an opportunity that you just didn't know about? Or a lot of these bail hearings, what I'm hearing, I'm looking at all the arguments on both sides of this, and this is one of those that kind of stuck out to me from a freedom perspective that I wanted to ask you about. So if you get arrested and you have a bail hearing, do you have the right to an attorney? I believe you do under the Constitution, but what percentage would you say people have the option for, and not unfortunately, fortunately, we do under the Constitution have a right to counsel, whether you can afford it or not. Now, I understand how that would jack up the legal system and how much more dollars and taxpayers' dollars we would have to put into it to make that happen. But what are your thoughts on a bail hearing without counsel?
Well, okay, so that has been litigated extensively, and here's what the law says. You have a right to an attorney to represent you at the core proceedings of your criminal case. So the question is setting bail a core proceeding? And I'm going to tell you, the answer to that depends. If the judge is setting bail based on an abuse of discretion standard, and you have the right to ask for to have it reconsidered at any time, it has been held not to be a court proceeding. But
I did not know that.
If you're in New Jersey, if you're in Galveston, Texas right now, if the judge is not setting bail, the DA is asking for it, and the judge has to apply a clear and convincing evidence standard, which is New Jersey, and you have to have a trial within 48 hours, 72 hours of arrest, well, then you would have a right to an attorney. And that's actually, I think, destroying the criminal justice system, because there's a whole bunch of reasons there, because there's DAs aren't ready to try their case, have a mini trial 3 days after arrest. So we need to keep setting bail with the judge on an abuse of discretion standard, and the defendant has a right to have it reconsidered at any time. And under that standard, it's not a court proceeding. You don't have a right to counsel at that hearing.
Okay, that's it. That's it. And I'm assuming, did the Supreme Court look at that?
Well, let's see. Well, it was argued in a case that's Booth versus Galveston. The trial court in Galveston ordered the county to provide legal counsel at the bail hearing, but it was a brief 3 years ago. They never issued an opinion, but the county was very confident that that's what the law was, that you only have the right to attorney at our core matter, and that setting bail was not one of those. And the case was ultimately dismissed. So I do think they're correct.
It couldn't climb the ladder at that point.
No, it couldn't. It couldn't.
Gotcha. Society's become more lethargic to the complaints of the left, even since all the BLM stuff that happened 2 or 3 years ago, which is, I think, where this bail thing is, this issue has become augmented in the media. And we know the media, they're on the side of the criminals. I think most people would agree with that, at least listen to this program. But an avalanche of criticism towards the judicial system, it's conspicuous after some of the more violent behavior in these cities, the looting, the burnings, the rioting. How, this is important to me. You've got to know, obviously, and I would like to know if you'd like to speak out and say that you do understand the fact that you're getting inundated by the left as this whole thing's turned racial. How, when you get specific questions on what you're doing benefits one group of people over another group of people, how do you combat that?
Well, look, we don't have a racist criminal justice system, but we do have crime running amok in our inner cities. And the problem is our inner cities have a disproportionate number of certain minority groups. And so there's a study out of Minnesota that I've highlighted on my podcast that shows that we have a disproportionate amount of crime being committed by certain racial groups. And until we are willing to address that, there's everything that we're doing, everything that the left is proposing is just making the system worse, because we're creating a system where there's no accountability, de facto decriminalization, more crime, and the more crime is being committed in the exact neighborhoods that they claim they're trying to help. And their response to all that is, well, we feel your pain.
So what I think you're saying is the way you combat that, which is, it's just common sense, but common sense is not. We all understand that in America now. It's to just simply say back to these people who say that these bail reform, if they say you oppose their bail reform measures, you're a racist, is to just explain to them, sit down and say, listen, what happens if your proposals get enacted and codified into law is your cities are going to continue to go down further and further. We're not looking at race, but since you brought it up, if your utopia was no bail, where would your cities, your communities, these brown and black communities be if you had that? But they refuse to look at it. Well, we all know, I think I know, I'm not going to put words in your mouth. The reason they don't want to look at it is because that's how they get elected. They have to have a certain amount of crime. They have to have a certain amount of unrest racially to be promoted and to be elected. And that's how they keep their power. I'm not going to keep you much longer, but I would like very much, and I do appreciate you coming on today. I really do, Ken. It means a lot to me. I want to just change this conversation just a little bit to immigration. Now, if I'm not mistaken, we have ruled the Supreme Court either decided not to hear it, and I had the opportunity to be in oral arguments at the Supreme Court a couple weeks ago. If I'm not mistaken, they refused to hear it. But if you have an immigrant come over, all of these people that are coming over illegally, they're being released into America, but they have criminal charges, and their hearings are set 7-8 years in the future. They didn't get bail. They didn't go before someone that says, hey, are you going to have bail? You're not going to have bail. I would like to ask you what your thoughts are on that. They're not getting bail hearings. They're being released without bail, but they're criminals. How does that work out with everybody else? I think if I was in Memphis and I was the head of Black Lives Matter in Memphis, okay, and I'm looking at all of these immigrants walking across, 10,000 yesterday, 9,000 the day before, and they don't get bail hearings. They just get released. What's your name? Okay, go. And they put them on a bus and they take them into the interior of the United States of America without a bail hearing, but they're criminals. Is there any correlation to bail reform if I was a Black Lives Matter representative in Memphis to immigrants walking over and not even getting a bail hearing but just getting released without it?
I do think there is a lot of overlap between these bad bail proposals and our federal immigration policy. They're both being pushed by the far left, and it's really removing all accountability from our immigration system, removing all accountability from our criminal justice system, creating chaos in our immigration system, creating chaos in our criminal justice system. The result of our chaos in our criminal justice system is de facto decriminalization, more crime. The result in our immigration system is chaos, which means people are being smuggled in. They have to pay back these people who are smuggling them in. And what are they doing to get money to pay off their debt? Committing crime.
Ken, thanks. If you've got a second for just one more question.
Sure.
Okay. I like to look at both sides of everything. I'm a freedom guy, straight up. That's what I exist for. But I do have a question. And I'm sure you've got a good answer for this, but I couldn't find one, and I didn't want to spend 3 days going to the law library and trying to figure it out. Can you stay in jail longer without posting bail than if you were convicted for the charge that you were charged with? If my 18-year-old does something stupid and steals something from Target and puts it in their pocket, walks out. So they're 18, they go to big people jail, and they don't have any money, and I'm not paying for it. And it's $1,000 bail. Judge says $1,000, and all I need to take $100 to the bail bondsman to get my kid out of jail, who's 18, who's an adult. And I say no, and they don't have $100 in their bank account. The maximum time they could spend in jail if they were convicted and thrown the book at, could they, if the court system couldn't get to them for 3 months, would they sit in jail for 3 months?
No, not in Texas they wouldn't, because in Texas for misdemeanors, there is a statute that says that if you have not been released after the passage of this amount of time, which I think is 30 days, you have to be released. And for a felony, it's longer, but unless you're charged with a crime that you have to be released on, that you could be held on, they have to set your bail. Now, all this litigation we've had over the last couple of years has been a fight over this very issue, because the left argues you have to be released if you can't afford bail. And that's not what any of the cases have said. What the cases have said is you have a right to a hearing. So you can't be held for 3 months without seeing a judge and asking for a reduction of your bond amount.
But that doesn't happen anyway. That's not something that's occurring every day in the United States.
Absolutely. And first-time offenders, there's not any first-time offenders stuck in jail. That's all right.
I got you. Right. That was a hypothetical, and it's not even happening.
Gotcha. That's what the charitable bail funds found. But you have a right to a hearing. And once you've had your right to a hearing, then the constitutional requirements have been met. And anything else that happens is the decision of the local courts, because you have to follow the floor of the Constitution, but anything else is up to whatever the locality wants to do. And so,
as much as it would be a burden on the taxpayer, do you think that there should be an increase in the number of courts to handle these things?
Well, if we're going to do these bad bail policies, it's going to require double the amount of courts just to resolve the same number of cases that we were resolving under the old system. So, I mean, we can't have these. One of the problems with these bad bail reform systems is it's intended to overwhelm the system. There was a mayor
right. No doubt.
Up north. She said, "Look, until you have a true alternative to the private surety bail system that has the same accountability and the same low failure to appear rate, you don't have an alternative." And that's what we're finding. All
so everybody gets out.
These mechanisms are not alternatives. They create chaos.
Ken, I appreciate you being on. I really do. It's been a pleasure. I know I have learned some stuff from you, and just through looking through what you've said and what you're doing. I appreciate you. The bottom line is, I think you and I would agree, or you may not, but I think we would, is the bottom line here is there needs to be a societal change. Folks need to be you need to take your kids to church, read the Bible to them, sit with them, pray over the meals every time they eat, have a mom and dad at the house, and we wouldn't even be here. That's the crux. That's the stone, the concrete on which all this other crap is not built. You've got serious problems with the family in certain cultures, and that's why we have this, and that's why we have to have these conversations. But when we do have to have these conversations, there does need to be a response to the left that says, let's just let them back out and reoffend, and everybody's fine. Thanks, Ken. I appreciate you so much. We look forward to hearing from you, and don't be a stranger.
Thank you very much for having me, guys.
Hey, Ken, how could other people on our podcast find your work and maybe support you in any way they could?
They can find more information by going to pbtx.com, the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. So pbtx.com. We have a blog where we highlight important stories in the criminal justice bail reform movement. And we also have our own podcast called The Bail Post. There's a link there, or you can just go to thebailpost.com, where we talk about just criminal justice issues, bad bail reform issues, and we try to educate lawmakers, judges, and the public.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.